Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their timeless and extraordinary personal stories of experience, strength, and hope. To date, there are more than 175 hour-long interviews in this podcast series, each one a testimony of the recovery available to all who want it in Alcoholics Anonymous. My guest on today's podcast is Paul B., who was born to a 17-year-old mother, then given up for adoption to an extended family member. Though he eventually met and formed a relationship with his birth mother, Paul describes his formative years growing up on a rural English farm as idyllic. As drinking was a normal part of everyday life, any alcoholism that Paul perceived in his family had little effect upon his upbringing. In fact, his own drinking didn't influence his behavior until his years at Oxford University, where he rapidly became part of its rarefied drinking culture. Finding everything he needed in a bottle or pint, Paul's propensity for managing his alcohol consumption was belied by his occasional binges and blackouts. For years after college, his professional and personal lives coexisted with his growing misuse and abuse of alcohol. Though he escaped many of the negative consequences experienced by many alcoholics, Paul's increased drinking fueled the disease that brought wreckage to his marriage and family life, and impending damage to his career. No amount of self-management could slow the downward progression of his alcoholism. Paul was forced to give up. Fortunately, he found AA before it was too late, and set upon a course of continuous sobriety. That was more than 7 years ago, and today, Paul gratefully stays the course through regular meetings, good sponsorship, daily reading AA literature, prayer, and being of service to his sponsees and his AA community. I believe you'll find Paul's story to be both inspiring and encouraging. It touches all the bases of a well-worked program and provides a helpful context with which you may discover many similarities to your own story. So sit back and enjoy the next 60 minutes with my friend and AA brother, Paul B.
Hello, my name's Paul and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Paul. Welcome to my AA Recovery Interviews podcast. I want to thank you so much for doing this today, kind of on short notice, too.
No, it's great. I'm honored to be asked, Howard. So my pleasure.
I met you, I guess, on our London meeting, that Zoom meeting that I've been going to for the last 4 or 5 years. And I heard you share, and it was captivating, and that's when you told part of your story. And I thought, more of the world needs to hear this.
Uh-huh.
That's why I asked you if you'd come on today. So again, many thanks for doing this. So one thing I didn't take down when I heard you share was how long you've been sober and what your sobriety date is.
Yeah, so my sobriety date is 4th of January 2018. So I guess that's 7 years.
Was that the first time you ever tried to get sober?
Well, I think I would argue that I'm a serial prelapser, if you know what I mean. I tried many times, but without the program, without AA. And so although I've never relapsed within AA, I've relapsed multiple times in my own pathetic attempts to conquer the fight with alcohol.
So was AA kind of the last resort for you?
No, it was so far from my mind when I came in, it's hard to emphasize. I'd sort of grown up knowing what AA was through my mother, particularly my uncle and my grandmother, I think. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, no, I'm not going to end up there. That's for the losers in the family. I'm a winner, and I'm gonna fight this on my own. I'm going to be cleverer and better and swerve it.
You ever notice how many people in the program have that exact same story with parents who've been in AA for years and years, and it hasn't done a whole lot to get them in any sooner?
Yeah, I know. That's exactly right, because I knew I had a problem with alcohol, but I wasn't prepared to describe myself as alcoholic because that was for the people in AA. And so I was just going to, skirt it and try it. And everything in the big book I've tried. I mean, literally.
Yeah, it's like that list in chapter 3 about take a vacation, don't take a vacation, and that sort of thing. Now, you mentioned that your mother, about AA and your mother, was she in the program?
She was, yeah.
Tell me about her.
So my mother got pregnant to my father very young, age 17, and had a pretty disastrous marriage. I mean, got married because she got pregnant, I think. And I don't know how early she had problems with alcohol or drugs. I know that it was chaos around that time. Basically, that marriage imploded. She ended up going out with one of Malcolm X's British counterparts, one of the Black Panthers, called Frankie Y, running around London, causing a sensation in society London at the time. And I presume just before that, was given a nanny, and the nanny took one look at the whole situation and literally took me away and kidnapped me. And I was found on the Isle of Wight. There's a reason I'm telling you this, because eventually what then happened is I was adopted effectively and brought up in mid Wales by my mother's sister. This is a long-winded way of coming back to your question, which is that I didn't get to know my real mother till much later, by which time she was in the rooms. And I got to know a lot of her friends who were in the rooms. There's a very sad bit just prior to that, for what it's worth, which is that she used to come and watch me in my new home with my new parents from a distance. I had no, yeah, and I had no idea about that. And I only learned that relatively late in life, and it makes me very sad to think of her. And I understand the reasons. I was meant to form a bond with these new people, which I did, and they probably saved me in many respects. I went back to live with her in later life, age 17 or something, came to London to do my A-levels. And that's when I sort of met her and her friends in AA and took a dim view of it, to be totally honest and transparent. I just thought I didn't take to some of her friends, and I thought this was a bad world she'd found herself in, even though, obviously, I now understand what an amazing gift that was to her and how it enabled her to be a sober, loving human being. So it's just, I guess it's the arrogance and ignorance of youth that set me off in the wrong direction with AA. But I didn't really overcome that for many years.
So her influence on you really started at age 17 because you were too young when she gave you up to the nanny, and then you were adopted by other people. So what happened in your adopted family?
Honestly, I mean, there are craziness things about it. And I'm just reading a book that has many similarities. But on the core level, on the fundamental level, it was absolutely idyllic. I mean, they provided me with a safe, loving, stable environment on a Welsh hill farm where we literally milked the cows, milked the goats, fed the pigs before school, but baled the hay in the summertime. And they were the town doctors as well as having this farm. And so we were part of the community. And so, to all intents and purposes, really didn't have anything to complain about growing up with what became my mother, father, and brothers and sisters. I would argue the degree to which I'm sane, which is a questionable degree, but the degree to which I am is entirely down to their love and the fact they picked me up and dusted me off and gave me that back upbringing, I guess.
What a beautiful thing to have happen after being given up. Idyllic is how a few of my guests in recent weeks and months have described their childhoods. For me, having grown up in something maybe the polar opposite of that, it's always been rather interesting for me to listen to people talk about having idyllic and wonderful childhoods. And my question to one of my guests after he said that was, how did you become an alcoholic? You're talking about this great childhood, everything was perfect when you were growing up and so forth. And he said very simply, I drank too much beer. It was such a straightforward answer that it made me realize that you don't have to have a miserable childhood to become an alcoholic. Sometimes the idyllic childhoods become alcoholics. Was there any alcoholism in and amongst the people in that family? Was there anything that you could observe as a child that you might say, I'm not going to be like that, I'll be like this instead?
Oh, yes. But let me pick up on that last point as well before I answer that, because I think that is kind of brilliant. I just drank too much beer. Because when I'm doing a chair, I literally have to, and I'm adjusting this over time, but I sort of have to decide, am I or am I not going to lead with this story about this poor baby born to this 17-year-old woman who gets given up? Because I honestly don't think it's got anything to do with me being alcoholic. And so I've sort of started to think, do you say that to sort of win over the audience almost? Or do you say it because, why are you saying it? And then the other day I went to give a chair last week, and I thought, I'm absolutely not going to start with that. I'm going to start with the happy childhood. And then into the room walks a childhood friend of my father, who's an amazing He's very open about being in the rooms, but I shouldn't name him. But he's a very successful composer. And he walks in and he sits down, and I thought, oh my God, I've kind of got to tell it from the beginning because I want him to hear it and I want him to tell me what bits he remembers after the meeting when we go for a coffee or something. I mean, I literally haven't seen this guy. So anyway, that main point there is I think I was always going to be alcoholic. And I partly know that because as a child, I would wander around sort of saying things like being obsessed and addicted to anything from collecting videos to cream buns, to you name it. And I would think this was fun. And I'd go around asking other people, like, I've got an addictive character. Have you got an addictive character? It's great. But to your question, yes, I did indeed have quite a real exposure to it because my real uncle, who was the brother of my real mother and my adopted mother, was given weeks to live from alcohol, vodka in his case primarily. And in order to not die, he came to live with us on the farm. And he arrived there with a lot of vodka, even though he'd been given weeks to live. And my mum would hide it or switch the vodka for water or various tricks to try and stop him. And my God, did I see the full horror of alcohol in that moment, because when he couldn't get his vodka, he would basically brought out a crate of brown bottled beer, which, as you know, is a speciality over here. And he would throw the bottles at the wall one by one very calmly and watch them explode. And as he threw them at the wall and they exploded, after each one, I can sort of almost hear the timing in my head. He would calmly say, "Where is my vodka?" And then the answer would come back like, "I'm not going to tell you, Willie, because it's killing you." And then he'd throw another bottle at the wall. And I just watching the grip-like vice that alcoholism had this man who I deeply loved. I thought he was amazing.
How old were you at the time?
Probably 15.
15. So you were old enough to have seen other people drinking, and maybe you'd even seen alcoholic behavior previously, but never that close up, I'll bet.
Yeah, I'd always thought, in a sense, it's a choice. And suddenly I saw somebody for whom it wasn't a choice. It was a disease or whatever you choose to call it, but it was killing him, and he still wasn't giving it up. Everyone in the family drank, but he was the most vivid example to me of alcoholism. But the mother who became my mother, who brought me up, had both an alcoholic sister and an alcoholic brother, and she was the oldest, and she somehow managed to not give in to alcoholism while they were alive. But it was really interesting when they'd both gone. I just watched her slowly succumb to this. It was like she'd had to fight it off in order to be the only adult in the room almost. And then when her brother and sister eventually both died relatively young, you'd kind of dread the evenings where she'd want to open a bottle very early, and then you'd kind of want to end the evening at a certain point because it would get quite bad sometimes.
Isn't that interesting how she took care of two alcoholics until they were gone, and then she picked up where maybe they left off?
Yeah. And her mother had been alcoholic, so the odds were stacked against her. But she managed probably until the age of 60-something, possibly later, to really not give in to it. But then she just thought, do you know what? Now it's my turn.
So no genetic propensity that you know of, but certainly you were observing behavior that was going on around there. When do you remember your first drink to affect some kind of outcome or thinking or feeling?
This is a difficult question for me because I always hear people remembering vividly their first. Because we lived on the farm, and literally the beer was on tap, there was sloe gin in the cupboard, there was wine in the cellar. It was just part of our growing up. I honestly couldn't tell you when the first drink was, except to say that alcohol was totally normalized. I can sort of remember the first time I got in trouble with it, which was a party at home where I think probably my party even, and sort of me wanting to be the big shot and wanting to be showing off. And I just clearly, I don't even remember what it was, but I remember throwing up. And that was probably age 15, 16, I imagine.
So when did the alcohol at that point, 15, 16, when did it start to affect your behavior in a way that somebody looking in on you might say, you know, he's drinking entirely too much. He's really changed a lot since he started. What would that have looked like?
I basically leave that farm age 17 and go to live with my real mother in London. And I was given a sort of a room and a sort of flat at the top of the house almost. And I remember the only thing that really excited me about this was that I had a fridge. And what I chose to do with that fridge was fill it with alcohol. That was my passage to adulthood, as it were, or the new phase of my life. But even then, I would argue my best man at my wedding basically gave a speech that said, Paul gets away with it. That's what he does. And I kind of did get away with it for a very long time. I think that the truthful answer is university. That's when the wheels started to come off. Because now I didn't have to pretend. So it's not to say I didn't get in trouble before university, but I managed to keep it under wraps or hide it. But I think by the time I got to university, it was pretty clear to me I couldn't handle it.
That's when the wheels are coming off. I always like to find out what was going on right before the wheels started coming off.
So I'd got into Oxford University, which was a sort of surprise to me and everyone else. But I think what was happening was a kind of realization. In a sense, I've lived a life of that sort of hole in the soul thing. I think I've lived a life of feeling less than, and feeling an imposter. And so then to get into Oxford is an interesting outcome in that world, because you've suddenly got this academic stamp of credibility, even though you've sort of been undermining yourself in your own head and thinking, well, I only got into this school because I was lucky, or I only got those exams. And so I think in a sense, the weight of expectancy on me by the time I got to Oxford is probably what was really happening prior to it. Anything going wrong. Like, oh my God, now I've done this, I've really got to start living up to this. And probably, will I be good enough? Am I clever enough? Have they made a mistake? Is everyone here cleverer than me? All of that stuff, I suspect.
Did your experience early on at Oxford there, did that speed up the process of those wheels falling off? Were you drinking more than you had before or less? What was the circumstances?
No, a lot more, because the culture at that point was so centered around drinking. That did a couple of things. I mean, it firstly allowed me to hide in plain sight. But secondly, it actually weirdly, I realized quite quickly that I couldn't actually handle it. So there's a thing. You'll like this one. So on a Monday night, my group of friends at Oxford University thought the most intellectual activity they could come up with was called Brosnik Night. Now, Brosnik Night was the cheapest vodka you could buy in our local supermarket. It was, and so Brosnik Night, you'd all go and buy a bottle of vodka and you would down it together. But I quite quickly knew that I couldn't do this. It would lead, I wouldn't be able to have whatever the amount was. It would just go on, and I would probably write off 2 or 3 days, which I just couldn't afford to do. So even at that point, by presumably the age of 18, 19, I was trying to manage the problem. I think in some ways the unusual thing about me is because of those experiences with my family, I knew exactly what alcoholism was. I knew exactly how dangerous alcohol was, and I pretty much knew I had an issue with it. So to some degree, I have lived a life of trying to fight it, trying to manage it, trying to negotiate it with it on a daily basis almost.
What's interesting to me, Paul, is that you mentioned early on about an idyllic childhood, and there's all this stuff going on around you, but you can still claim an idyllic childhood. And then you take the knowledge that you have of drinking and of alcoholism off with you into an environment where you're with other people who may not have had those same experiences, and suddenly they're affecting you differently than they did when you were living at home. I'm wondering what there was about that experience that might have informed you that you were heading into a life of consequences, or where you could become a functional alcoholic and nobody would seem to mind.
I mean, I think the real difference is the degree, because suddenly you're in a college in Oxford University with lots of other people all abusing alcohol, whether or not they're alcoholic. You could easily argue they're abusing alcohol, even if they're not alcoholic. So you've got a culture of abuse of alcohol and an endless supply of people willing to do it around you, so that even if the person who's got an essay tomorrow isn't with you that night, somebody else is. So it's permanently, the on button is permanently there for alcohol abuse. It's like if you're that way inclined, it doesn't go away. And this is everywhere, from the junior common room. I mean, I could list all the places. Every which way you turned, alcohol was there. And I think, therefore, if you're alcoholic and you don't yet know it, it's pretty easy to fall into that trap of moving from with one group to a different group to another one just to keep it going, really.
So Oxford is kind of at the top of the food chain as far as academic institutions go, not only in Great Britain but around the world. And it strikes me that there might be people thinking that if they can drink and still get along and still get their degree at Oxford, then there can't possibly be anything wrong with the way that they drink.
Right.
What were your attitudes about your own drinking when you left school or when you moved on to the next phase in your life?
I think by then I knew I had a problem, but I wasn't prepared to call it alcoholism. Because of that early experience in my family, I wasn't prepared to go there. So I would be trying all these desperate measures to avoid having to face up to the fact I had a problem, really. I mean, one of the things I've always loved about AA is that phrase, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, because that let me through the door ultimately in a way that if the sentence had been the only requirement for membership is to admit you're an alcoholic, I probably wouldn't have ever crossed the threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a subtle difference. And of course, it's very subtle, because actually what we then do once you've crossed the threshold is we make you sit down and go, hello, my name's Paul, I'm an alcoholic. But I like the idea that the only requirement is a desire to stop drinking. That seems to be a very wide open door that lots of people could pass through to check it out, at least.
Yeah, the thought that you have to admit that you're an alcoholic, I know for a number of people I've known over the years, has been sufficient to keep them out of the rooms for a long time until somebody gets with them face to face and says, you don't have to even have stopped drinking. All you have to have is the desire to stop. And one of the people I interviewed for the show a couple years back, she was going to AA meetings for 5 years, drinking in between meetings. And it took her 5 years of going to meetings before she finally was able to stop. And she said if the requirement for membership was you had to have stopped drinking, she never could have been a member. But the fact that the only requirement was a desire to stop, she had the desire the whole time, she just couldn't stop.
Yeah.
And now she's got 30-something years. And, there's stories like that around, just as many about people not making it, too.
I love that. That's beautiful.
You graduated, and what were the next several years of your life like?
I think the next several years are quite interesting because I left with a girlfriend from Oxford and lived with her.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, I don't know whether this is not true of the person I then married, who was painfully aware of it. But I don't know that the girl that I was with, started to date at Oxford and then lived with after Oxford in London, really felt I had a problem. It reminds me of my best man speech. I just got away with it. But I so clearly did have a problem. I mean, by then we've moved into a world where you're sort of having your friends around for dinner parties and there are drinks parties and we're all trying to be sophisticated London media people and all the rest of it. I mean, I can think back to quite a few instances, but not once did it ever cross her lips that she thought I had a problem, which I find slightly shocking now. In 5 years of dating.
So she was perhaps enabling you, but not necessarily calling it that or realizing that?
I think so. What's even weirder is I'm not sure I could tell you how much she drank, but I couldn't really tell you how she drank. Whereas with other partners, I'm quite aware of it.
What was there that you noticed about her drinking that might have led you to believe that the reason why she wasn't saying anything to you about you was because of the way she knew she was?
Yeah. So one of the things I should say up front, I should have said this to you earlier on, is because of that early life, that sort of suddenly being taken out of one family and put in another at 2.5, I have this theory that I genuinely, and lots of people say they have a bad memory, and lots of people in alcoholics say they have a bad memory, but I feel like mine is real, and it's almost like a whiteboard where stuff is written on it and it gets rubbed out almost as soon as it's happened. So there are kind of details like that I just simply can't access. I genuinely couldn't put myself into the place where I told you much about her attitude. All I could tell you is she didn't, at any point, to the best of my memory, ever bring up my drinking.
So maybe that was some kind of tacit acceptance of that, or she ignored that, or kept it under wraps within her own thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what was going on in her head.
That was a great situation for you, though, that you
Yeah.
could continue to drink, not necessarily with impunity, but you could drink all you felt you wanted to, and she wasn't going to be hassling you about that. And,
Yeah.
sometimes that kind of enabling keeps people out there much longer than if the spouse said something to them. But I think there's a fine line between a spouse or a girlfriend saying something to you and you getting it to the extent that you want to get better, or saying something to you with the intent of trying to chastise or control you.
Yeah. No, I think that's so true. I mean, and actually the whole table's reverse when I then meet the woman I ended up marrying,
Hmm.
because she was really aware of it from the very beginning. And she would say, before we ever got married, she said, I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. But the thing that will break us apart is your drinking. And then when we got engaged and on our wedding day, well, no, actually, on our wedding party, I was completely out of control and falling over and falling onto the laps of other women. But she then sort of essentially begged me not to drink on our wedding day, and I couldn't process how that was a good idea. It's our wedding day. Why would I not drink? I love drinking, and if I ever want to just really give myself a sort of quick injection of sobriety and sort of chastise myself, I literally just quickly just think of what I put my wife through, who stayed with me, by the way, and couldn't be a bigger fan of AA than anyone on the planet for what she's done, for what it's done for us. But she was much more aware of it and much more really begging me to stop.
She knew at the beginning, though, didn't she, when you first met?
Yeah.
So what was there about your behavior while you were drinking?
Yeah.
She stayed with you despite the fact that she didn't want you to drink, but you were still drinking.
I think it's related to that early stuff about all the controls I put in place. If in a sense, if we accept the notion that I knew I had a problem and I was developing coping strategies to deal with it, I think they were pretty well formed. So, for instance, I would seldom drink because right from an early age, I was given the checklist of what makes an alcoholic,
Yeah.
pretty much as a baby, like, here you go,
Mm-hmm.
you'll be getting all of these. And therefore, I would quite consciously try to not drink in the day. I would try and quite consciously not drink on my own because I thought this was clever, that this means I'm not an alcoholic. And one of them would be not really to start drinking until the evening. Now, like many of my friends, that the earlier that evening could start, the better. And in fact, my father's like this, to be honest, my real father. It's like the evening can't start till the bottle opens. That's just immutably connected. So I think I basically managed to socialize my abuse, as it were.
Yeah, I was thinking when you said that, what was going through my mind was this guy has finally found a way to normalize drinking. You came up with your own list about what normal drinking looks like, and what it looks like is not drinking in the evening or, not drinking during certain occasions that are sacred or whatever. And it was sufficient enough that your girlfriend and then wife was satisfied?
Yeah. And more than that, I think when I did come into the rooms, even at that point, most of the people I know, I don't tend to tell people, by the way, but for what it's worth, because somebody, a sponsor very early on said, I asked, should I be telling people? And he said, well, bear in mind that if you give it away, you can never take it back. So,
Sure.
I don't advise it as a kind of rule, daily rule, but obviously you're welcome. And I'd become quite adept at hiding it, I think, is the honest truth. Not all, but most of the people I know would be surprised if I said to them, I'm in AA and I'm an alcoholic. But the other blessing I had, in a sense, is if you think back to the point I made earlier, that I constantly was trying to manage it, I heard this phrase the other day, I could stop, but I couldn't stay stopped. Do you know that one? And I would constantly be stopping for a day, for an evening, for a weekend, for a week, for longer. And so people weren't entirely surprised when I wasn't drinking, because I'd tried that numerous occasions and failed. So I patently, obviously knew I had a problem.
But one of the things that keeps us from thinking we have a problem, at least in my experience, Paul, is that if we can quit and stay quit for a week or a month or however long, we've just proven to ourselves and perhaps to our loved ones that we can stop anytime.
Yeah.
And the ability to stop suddenly becomes the reason why you continue to drink.
Right. It's the biggest con of all, isn't it? It's like, look, I've stopped, so I can carry on.
That disease is so cunning and baffling.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect example of the cunning and baffling because you essentially, I think, know that you're going to drink again. So therefore, you're willing to give it a pause because that's going to give you the ticket to carry on drinking. Whereas carrying on drinking might not do that. So you'll do the pause.
Every time I stopped smoking weed, I would take whatever weed I had and I'd hide it somewhere in the house with the idea that I'm stopping for good. But if I don't stay stopped, I'll be able to find it. So you were together for how long before you got married?
2 years.
Okay, so you got 2 years worth, and she wasn't on your case about drinking at that point?
No, but well, she was open about it. She said, "I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. We're going to get married. That's all good. But just so you know, if anything pulls us apart, it's going to be alcohol. It's going to be your drinking." And I just couldn't hear that. I look back now with shame that I didn't really even process that properly.
Well, you probably stumbled over the subtlety of it.
Yeah.
With her not saying right out, you have to stop.
Yeah.
My wife was somewhat the same, but the subtlety of it was she said, yeah, go ahead, keep drinking. But one day I won't be here. And that subtlety, I mean, it hit me like a sledgehammer, but, she never came right out and said, you got to stop. Had she done that, I probably would have continued just despite the fact, I'm gonna continue to drink just to prove that I can and that I'm not an alcoholic.
So Howard, are you still together?
Yeah, we've been married. We've been together over 40 years.
Lovely. Yeah.
And how about you and yours?
1996. So getting on for 30, is that?
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying my AA Recovery Interviews podcast, check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first printing of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing and meaningful way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. While you're there, enhance your program with another audiobook I produced, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. Listen to a free sample of Lost Stories of the Big Book on Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. It's also available as a Kindle book or in paperback from Amazon if you'd like to read along. You're gonna love it. And we're back. What were the early years like in your marriage? You said you dated for a couple years, and what did those look like with regard to your drinking and your behavior?
Pretty bad. I mean, what happens with me? Because I forced myself not to have a drink until the evening, and then we would go out. I would be argumentative, rude, aggressive, not to her particularly, though occasionally, but mostly to other innocent bystanders. No, people at the table would. One of my friends used to say, and I know this phrase doesn't actually make sense, but it was the phrase he used to use. He used to say, we get to the point in the evening where Paul's brain leaves the hospitality suite and just starts running around. and I, although that doesn't make pure logical sense, I sort of get what he means. It's like, okay, it's free fall now. Anybody could be targeted. And what used to particularly annoy me, because of course, I think this is underlying my lack of self-confidence and also my lack of memory and knowledge, was people who would sit there being certain in their world knowledge, their worldview, and I would just have to try and take their legs off verbally. And so what would happen then is either a number of things would happen. My wife would try and get me out and home as soon as possible, or if she could see this coming on, or she would leave without me and I would really make a mess of the evening. But most common of all, we'd sort of politely get through the evening, and then I'd retract some of the stuff I'd said and slightly sober up if we were lucky. But most commonly of all, I would have to write an apology to people
Huh.
for the rudeness, effectively.
Were you a blackout drinker?
Yes, but not always. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I didn't, and then I never knew what that meant till I came into the room. But yeah. But then, in a sense, I'm a blackout liver. I live, I black out about
Well, you
everything.
black out what you choose to black out too. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
that's one of the convenient things about being a blackout drinker is if for the things that you don't want to remember, you don't have to, and you can just plead blackout. But
Yeah. Yeah.
that makes it kind of difficult. Now, these are social situations that you're in, and marital situations. I wanted to ask you about kids and family, growing a family.
Mm. Yeah. So I've got two daughters who are now 24 and 22. They don't really remember me. They're sort of, I don't think they're surprised, but it's not like they saw my behavior and thought, "Oh, I see why he's in AA." On the other hand, what I love is they're so proud of me, and I love it on an AA birthday when they will, wherever they are in the world, sometimes they will contact me and congratulate me and say they're so proud. And I guess partly because they've now been through the same millstone that is university and seen the brutality of how alcohol is abused there, and some of their friends coming a cropper.
So you joined AA when they were in their teens.
Yeah.
So they had the opportunity to live with you and experience you while you were still actively, if not in the disease, at least drinking as if you were. Have you ever sought out any feedback from them about what their lives felt like while you were doing that?
I haven't really. It's a good question. And the reason I think I haven't is because the worst effects of it to me weren't when I was drinking a lot, which I tended to not do when they were around.
Hmm.
It's more the self-centered selfishness of me as a father that I don't think they could probably see, but I could feel in the choices I made and the way I went around it. I mean, the gifts. I mean, I don't need to say this to you, but the gifts of life and how to live life and that go beyond not drinking in AA are so profound to me that if I could wish one thing back, it might be to give them back their first 15 years with 100% sober father. That would be wow, what a gift that would have been instead of the other self-centered person they did have.
When you went into AA, did they ever say anything to you prior to that about, Dad, you need to stop, or was that something that you just were able to manage?
No, I think I was able to manage. And interestingly, both of them came to an AA meeting very early on. My very first meetings were in India, and I was with my daughter, and we were on
Mm-hmm.
holiday with a friend who was in the rooms. And one of them just sort of out of interest said, "Can I come?" And it was my second ever meeting. And I looked at my friend and said, "I don't know. Can she come?" And it gets even more profound or weird, if you like, because my friend said, "If you're comfortable with it, I'm comfortable with it." So she came, and we got to this hut in the middle of nowhere in a rural Indian place, and it was locked, and there was no one there. And then a guy turned up on a moped, unlocked it, and said, "I'm not sure if anyone else is turning up, but we can have the meeting anyway."
Hmm.
And the result of that was that the three of us, not my daughter, but myself, my friend, and the Indian secretary, let's call him, all shared at some length, effectively all gave a mini chair. And you don't call them chairs there, do you? Do you call them shared? Just share.
Shares or leads or, yeah.
Leads, that's it, yeah. Um, and so she heard my full story in my second ever meeting.
Wow.
And
It must have been difficult sitting there with your daughter who had gone through everything that you are now talking about.
yeah, and I think I wanted her to hear it because I was aware that she was about to enter the same stage of life. She was about to do her exams, go to university, encounter all that stuff. So I think I wanted her to hear it, but it was a very interesting opening of one's heart in that.
You opening up like that, sharing with her something that you had been ashamed about or hiding for a long time, finally being able to say it to her and to a couple of other people. That sounds like a good way to start in the program. Are you sober since that day, or did you slip after that?
Yeah, no. Again, I don't think no one's exactly the same, are they? But what had happened with me is that I'd gone on a holiday with that same daughter, or the one who came to that first. So maybe this is related. So I'd gone on a holiday to the Bahamas with her because she loves pigs, and there's an island in the Bahamas with the swimming pigs. And when each of my daughters reached 16, my wife and I would give them the choice to go anywhere in the world they wanted with one parent. And so I went to the Bahamas with the pigs. And I remember arriving there, and the first thing I did was to go to I can't remember what you call them, but to the off license and buy some rum and some beers and stack these, none of which were of interest to my 16-year-old daughter. And then we had the holiday, and I just worked my way through this stash of alcohol. And I just, at some point there, thought, this is not good, because now I'm actually doing the very thing I've managed to avoid most of my life. Is I'm not even hiding it in a social situation. I'm just going for it straight. I didn't drink after that holiday in some sort of response to that, in one of my many non-drinking things. But it led straight into another holiday coming up to Christmas with an actor friend, a very successful actor who's in the rooms. And I knew he didn't drink, and I knew he was in the rooms. So I thought, do you know what? I should just carry on. I don't know how many weeks it was, 3 weeks maybe. I made it. I'll just carry on because I don't want to upset him on holiday. And I really respect him. And so it was a pure example of attraction, not promotion. He never said anything to me. And then on the holiday, we're not drinking. And at some point he says, I'm going to go to an AA meeting tomorrow night at 7:00, but I'll see you back at whatever. And I said, could I come? Can I come? Can I come? And there was no part of my brain that had ever processed the idea that I might go to an AA meeting. So I never actually had another drink after the Bahamas holiday, but I don't ever count that as my sobriety date, because that was just another one of my stopping for a bit. So to prove I'm not an alcoholic. I then went to a number of meetings in India, and I don't count those. I count my sobriety date as when my friend left, he gave me the number of his sponsor. He said, if you're interested in, go to some more meetings in India, by all means. But if you're interested when you land, call the number. And I called the number. And when I landed, within an hour, I was in a meeting in London. And that's my sobriety date, because in a sense, I'd realized, okay, I'm taking this seriously, aren't I? I see. I am going to do this one day at a time from today. Whereas I think up until then, I'd been feeling my way towards it.
Yeah, so that was January 4th of 2018?
Yeah. So it's weird. So not only have I not had a drink since then, I've actually not had a drink for some time before that. But I would in no way describe that as sobriety. I would just describe that as my old behavior.
Well, that's the gift that was given to you.
Yeah.
Sounds like you reached a point at which you were ready. If you were saying, without even thinking about saying it to your friend, can I go? It's a certain part of your psyche reaching out, isn't it?
Yeah. Because I had literally no conscious thought that I wanted or needed or should go to an AA meeting. That was so far from my thinking.
When you went to the first AA meetings back when you were in London, what did you think about the AA meetings themselves?
So I had been into one AA meeting. So I knew about it from my mum, but I'd never been to one. And then I did know about it from my brother, who'd taken me to a meeting about, say, 3 or 4 years earlier. And I'd walked into that, also quite nearby in London, and almost had a visceral response of like all the things we sometimes hear, like, I don't like the God thing. I don't like this list of things you're meant to do. And you're clearly a lot of messed up people, and I'm clearly not. So good luck with this club. I hope it helps you. I'm out the door. But although weirdly, I did take the chip. I did take the one, newcomer's chip. But I never went back. That was it. I thought, I don't like the feel of this. So when I get to that meeting in London, having sort of accidentally arrived in an AA meeting in India, it nearly happened again, because I sat next to a guy. He was very welcoming, and he turned to me and he said, I'm not well. I've lost my marbles and I'll never get them back. And he said a few more things. And then we did the meeting, where obviously you don't talk to each other much. And at the end of the meeting, he said, here's my number. Shall we go for a coffee tomorrow? And I thought, I don't really think this is how I want to. And so I called, but this is the good thing. This is so beautiful of how AA works. I called the guy, my friend's sponsor that had sent me to the meeting. And I said,
Right.
thank you. I went to the meeting. He must have asked me to call him at the end of it. So I called him at the end.
Sure.
I said, thank you. It was great. It was really good. But there was this really weird guy and he wants me to go for a coffee. And I love the way that AA does it because he just gently said, okay, well, we don't want you to do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. But just out of interest, what's the worst that could happen? And I thought, oh, Jesus, they've got an answer for everything. Okay, all right, well, I'll go for a coffee with him. So I went for a coffee with him. And honestly, to this day, he remains one of my closest friends in AA.
Isn't that wild?
It's just such a pleasure to be on the journey with him. And I just think the prejudice one arrives into these things with can be so stultifying and frustrating and irritating.
He tells you at the beginning that he's lost his marbles, and then he invites you out to coffee at the end. I mean, that doesn't seem quite right, but it sounds to me like he knew what he was doing.
Yeah, and he's also been on a journey in that time as well, and is so much better, I think. And he's found his marbles.
Yeah, he must have. And so, how about the process of getting a sponsor? What did that look like for you?
So that was quite interesting. There's an interesting tale around this in a sense. So what happened is my friend's sponsor suggested to my friend that he should sponsor me. And I think both the friend and I felt this was an interesting test of our friendship almost, but also a kind of an equation that we weren't sure made sense. Nevertheless, because his sponsor had suggested it, we did do it. And I have to say, it's probably the most wonderful thing that ever happened because I had already had love and trust of him anyway. And because he and his sponsor are so meticulous and thorough in their approach to the steps and to AA and everything about it, I basically was just taken very beautifully through both him and his sponsor, who sort of work almost not in tandem, but there's nothing I could ask him that his sponsor wouldn't have had an input to. It was a really brilliant 5 years we were together on that. And in the end, it could have gone on forever, I think, but I also wanted the friendship just to be a friendship. So at the end of 5 years, with absolutely nothing having gone wrong, I suggested to him that it might be time for me to find another sponsor. And he didn't really put up much fight to that.
What would be behind your thinking on that? Why did you decide you wanted to get another sponsor?
I think just this thing that I wanted our friendship to become just a friendship again. Because our families are intertwined. I'm godfather to his children. He's godfather to my children. We go on holidays together. He's given me probably the greatest gift that any friend could ever have given me by delivering AA and sobriety to me. So that's always going to be true. I wanted to remove the sponsor-sponsee relationship from that. I'm not saying this was a truth. I'm just telling you honestly what went through my head. That I want the full friendship back, not the friendship/sponsor back.
It sounds reasonable to me, Paul, in a lot of different ways. And I've had to do the same thing with a few men that I've sponsored over the years, because the friendship, while it can involve the sponsorship role, especially if that sponsorship role is pretty close anyway, and then the friendship just fills in, it gives that man the opportunity to find another sponsor whom he can work with and give the gift that we give those sponsors of ours in letting them sponsor us. So actually, it sounds like a very reasonable approach. So you're working in AA. What did your... this has kind of come up for me because in the last few days, I've talked to a couple young men who've really been struggling with the fourth step. A couple of them saying that they have been in the program for a while and haven't been able to get through it. What was doing the fourth and fifth step for you like?
It was I was worried about it from day one. I could sort of see it coming up, and it became a bigger and bigger. But I didn't let it get in the way. I just did what was asked of me and what was suggested, and we went through steps 1, 2, and 3, and that all seemed okay. And then it's like you take a deep breath and you think, oh my God, we're on step 4 now. But I was led through it so gently. by this sponsor who had been my friend, who kind of knew a lot of my history as well. And at no point do I remember that the hurdle or the mountain that I felt I had to conquer ever really appearing, because I was literally led through it step by. And it's so cleverly done, the way the columns are laid out and you're asked to write these things down, and it sort of falls out, doesn't it? It's so beautifully constructed that what had appeared to me an insurmountable blockage in my path to the 12 steps, actually, when it came to it, not only was there no moment where I thought this is hard or this is difficult, because I just put them down and I was given enough time, and it just came out. And then in delivering them in step 5, it really is an amazing, I love that phrase. It's an amazing unburdening of oneself. And I love that phrase about, what you're doing in steps 4 and 5 is getting to the point where you no longer have to cross the road to avoid anybody. And that's kind of how I felt. The beginning of that process, where you began to unburden yourself of any guilt or shame, really start to embed that idea of taking some responsibility yourself.
It's hard to talk about the 4th step without talking about steps 8 and 9.
Yeah.
What did those look like for you?
To me, they weren't endless, but they were bad.
In what way?
Well, like, they were just things that I felt I would rather never have brought back up, and certainly never made amends for. I mean, a silly example, but it's. I've done various things in my career, but one of them was, which you may not be surprised to hear, is to set up some bars in London Soho. And at one point, so I'm the co-owner of this bar, and at one point, I'm sitting in the bar with our manageress somehow coming to sit opposite me. I think I'm probably also at this point on the Atkins diet, amongst other things. And so I haven't got any carbs in me, and I'm drinking all this stuff. And I literally leaned over and was just sick across the table and all over the manageress. And I thought, yeah, this is not a good look for the owner of the bar.
Oh, jeez.
Oh dear. But it's things like that it really is an unburdening of the guilt and the shame, I think, and the ability to just make amends. And I was always amazed by how graceful and grateful people were that when one did make amends.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. When it happens, it's a beautiful thing, and thank God it happens the majority of the time.
Yeah.
How I prepare men who I'm taking through the 8th and 9th step. We do a little role playing. If she says this or he says this, you'll say that, and back and forth until it's a really reasonable approach by the book to something that is perceived as hugely difficult, but afterwards is looked back on as, why did I wait so long?
Yeah.
That was easy. But, it seems to me that unless you've got somebody who is watching over your shoulder and preparing you, it's so easy to do that step wrong when you're counting on being forgiven.
Yeah.
And when you're counting on influencing somebody else's behavior by doing it. And I've run into some guys who've jumped off the pier before realizing how deep or shallow it was. And it's come back to really bite them in the ass.
I so agree.
But overall, I think if you can get to the 9th step and even start doing a handful of amends, then things kind of build from there.
No, and let me ask you this, because I'm wondering if you've encountered this with anyone else, because my sponsor and his sponsor before him have this lineage where they do something that most people I know don't do, but I really liked it, which is what they do is they do the steps, the 8th and 9th, they do as a written amends. And the beauty of that is the bit you've just described as, if they say this, you say that. If you iron out the possibility, everything you just said, it sort of gets tackled with them when you write the letter. Because I would write a letter that said, blah, 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 and they'd go, when you say that, are you actually trying to say that it's their fault? Or are you trying to say that and it was a beautiful way, because if you are, it doesn't really feel like an amends to me. And these letters would go back and forth, and them going, I still don't feel you've really nailed it, Paul. And I think the lesson I learned in that process, and often, therefore, what's the other nice thing about it is often I would get the response back as a letter because they literally write a letter. You literally either give it to them or post it to them, and often the response would come back as a letter, which was also beautifully done. But I think the lessons I learned in that I carry through life. And I literally yesterday was advising two people in a work environment, and I spent about 45 minutes talking them through a difficult situation they were facing. And at the end of it, they thanked me for my rather miraculous insight, blah, 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 to which, if I could, I would have said, I have told you nothing of my own thoughts in the last 45 minutes. Because everything I was saying had come out of the steps and my meetings and AA. Everything in steps 8 and 9, but also about resentments and about handing it over and doing the next right thing. And that's all I was telling them. But they were like, oh my God, it's amazing. Wow, you sage, what wonderful, wise man.
Isn't it amazing how the program kind of infiltrates your psyche and you're talking to somebody and you're not even planning to say something, but you say it and you think, wait a second, where did that come from? You kind of link it back to something that you learned from your sponsor or in a meeting or from the steps. But no, that's a beautiful way to do things and a really terrific approach.
Have you come across that before, though, Howard? The letter writing thing.
Oh, yeah, I have. In fact, in addition to letter writing, some men I know, they get together with their sponsors and sponsors and great sponsors and that sort of thing. They'll sit around a dinner table and discuss that. It's real time.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, with electronic mail and text, it's easier to do.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I sometimes think the more input you get, the better.
Yeah.
Unless you're looking for a certain answer and you're just getting all the input you can to narrow it down to somebody who agrees with you.
Yeah.
But I get that. You know, what I want to ask you about, and we haven't really talked about your life outside of AA and outside of the social that you were talking about, but in business and in your professional life, how has AA impacted that, and what was it like before and what's it like now?
It's so huge. It's sort of hard to describe. I used to be somebody who was incredibly anxious, was always worried about the next thing I had to deal with, probably over planning how I would approach it. And a load of stuff that when I first came into the rooms, I thought that sounds like a cliche. Oh, yeah, I'm glad if that helps you, but that's clearly a meaningless sentence. It's kind of the paradigm by which I live every day now. By which I mean handing it over. You know, the third step stuff is massively helpful to me, and allows me to be a much more serene human being, even when approaching the biggest of problems. And phrases like "this too shall pass," and they sound trite when you first hear them, and they're so profound when you start actually living by them, I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it sort of made me. And don't get me wrong, I don't wake up and become a Zen-like, serene human being. And I still wake up with fear, and I still have to cope with it. And my meditation often comes in the form of swimming, for what it's worth. But I think there's very little I'm frightened of now in a work environment, in my work outside of AA. And it's because I just apply the tools of AA to it. And life is so much easier and simpler and less fraught.
How long did it take you to see that change?
I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years, I would guess. But I find it ongoing. I think it's incremental. I think each year I get better employing the tools. And I love the way AA deals with resentments as well. I think that's just beautiful, you know. And I don't think I even knew what a resentment was when I came in. And now I'm so aware when I pick one up, and I'm so aware of how I should deal with it, which I don't always do. But that's kind of what I was dealing with yesterday, with this guy who basically had built up a massive resentment about his boss, and he wanted to go into the meeting. He was talking to me with wanting some advice before he went into the meeting. And basically, he was preparing a list of the 480 things they'd done wrong and why he was right. And because of AA, I was able to go to him, do you think you could have done this any better? And after it didn't initially, but eventually he goes, yeah, well, maybe. And I got him in the end to go into the meeting, and I've spoken to him today, and it went well. To go in and go, I hold my hand up. I didn't actually handle this very well, and that led to a very constructive meeting where jointly they tried to solve the problem instead of arguing about whether or not it was his fault. And it was just that's purely come out of AA.
That's practicing these principles in all your affairs.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
how it works.
yeah. It was so lovely to see. But I find that on a daily basis, something will have gone better or been easier or been more satisfying because those principles have been applied.
Yeah, and sometimes I remember when I was kind of new in the program and I have a business issue, and my sponsor is extraordinarily successful. And whenever I would early on ask him about certain things, his responses to me about business, that is, he could have given me any number of different pieces of advice from his expertise, but instead he would say stuff like, I'd lay out the situation, and he said, "Have you prayed about it?" I thought, oh man, that doesn't. Have you asked God what to do? Well, no, not really. Have you asked God to put the right words in your mouth when you go into that meeting? Well, I guess. And all of that sounded too simple.
Yeah.
But in the end, it turned out to be brilliant because when I actually employed those, I'm not even going to call them techniques. It makes them sound too
calculated.
Too calculated, but the minute I did that, and the minute I was rigorously honest in situations that even in sobriety I might not have been, it all just seemed to work out. And that to me is a great demonstration of practicing the principles in all our affairs after having the spiritual awakening sufficient to be able to know that you don't have all the answers and that there's a power greater than ourselves that does.
I must quickly tell you the counterfactual of this. Because yesterday with this guy was terrific, but I do have another story which is completely the opposite, and it was probably my fault. I employed somebody in a business from the rooms, thinking I was doing the next right thing, thinking I was helping them, and as somebody wisely said to me afterwards, next time we carry the message, not the alcoholic. And what happened in it was extraordinary. This guy was using the AA canon of wisdom against me. So he was really, really messing up. And I would have to come in and try and sort this problem out, having tried to help him. I got him a visa, got him to stay in the UK, gave him an important role in the business. And then he was really messing up. And I kind of tried to tackle him on it. And I found him coming at me with phrases like, "Yeah, but Paul, what's your part in it?" And I'm going, whoa. You've just weaponized AA against me.
How did you deal with that?
Oh, dear. I've been out, it's as close to being fuming. It's as close to leaving the AA rule book as I've been in a while, I think. I hope I walked away. I felt very aggressive and not pleased. But I didn't do anything terrible.
There's a lot to be said for keeping business and your program kind of separate.
I learned that the hard way. And of course, if you do it and it goes wrong, you've got to then see each other in the meeting all the time. It's like, ouch.
Yeah, I get that. And so that's always a big challenge. Well, it sounds like you found some really neat ways to work your program. And from what you told me about your sponsors, how about the men that you sponsor? Tell me a little bit about your service as a sponsor in the program.
Well, I'll tell you one of them will surprise you, or it should surprise you, but it actually works very well, is that the guy who lost his marbles is one of my sponsees now.
Oh, no, that's great.
Because I think he decided he wanted what I had after 4 or 5 years of me which is it's very nice, and it does work. Yeah. It works very well. There are others who are less successful and who I love deeply and so want to succeed, but I'm thinking of a couple in particular who have been struggling. And again, it's a bit like, we carry the message. They have to want it and they have to be ready. And I'm here and I'm helping them. And when they stumble, I have to not blame myself for that. I think it's a beautiful program that we give each other that time and that on anything. It doesn't have to be with drinking, does it? It could be, I don't know what to do about my credit card bill. Fine, call me up, because that may lead you to drinking. So call me up.
Yeah. And most of my answers are going to be informed by what I've learned in the program.
Exactly. I'm very rarely going to say anything original, if ever.
Well, and you can't go wrong saying something from the program because, assuming that that's what saved our life, who's going to really question it in the end? In the years that you've been sober, what events or situations stick out to you as those that, had you not been in the program, might have really taken you down, or while you're in the program might have taken you out? And on the flip side of that, what are things that have occurred that would not have been possible without active participation in the program?
Yeah. I mean, the obvious ones that would have taken me down are the work-related travel stuff, which is when I would be at my worst. And what tends to happen now is if I'm at some function in some far-off place, because often, a bit like university, inbuilt to that is a alcohol-fueled socializing at the end of the day or at some point. And I just take myself off and I go for a swim, or I go to the cinema, or I talk to somebody who isn't drinking. I avoid it that way. Anything that would have led me to go out in that time, I think I'm quite lucky, because almost from the moment I got it, which was quite early on, and I sometimes try to explain this to sponsees who, because they don't get it, it doesn't really mean anything to them. But essentially, it's really as black and white to me as there's my life before and there's my life now. So what bit of having a drink is going to get anything better? I mean, it just doesn't compute. There's no conceivable world, even in tough times, even when the shit's hitting the fan. I tend more to turn to AA to help solve it than to risk going out of the program, interestingly. And then what was the other side? Which stuff has it led to that through sobriety? I am somebody who likes meetings, so I don't make a note of it, but I pretty much go every day. But I go to a lot of meetings because I love it. But the other side to that, you're bringing your success to the meeting and, showing people attraction rather than promotion. But the other side, which I think is equally important, is if you get a level of success, is the humility that you learn within the rooms. Not a thing I really understood. And I have had a huge amount of success, and I have to pinch myself at how lucky I am. But I actually learn in the rooms that doesn't add up to a hill of beans. What matters is how you comport yourself, what you do with other people, how you lead your life. It's the spirituality bit that I didn't even believe existed, I guess, as well, before I came in.
Paul, you're my kind of AA guy. You talk about going to 7 meetings a week. I go to meetings every day. You talk about an active program of sponsorship and of prayer and of helping others inside and outside the rooms. That's what I try and do. And whenever I meet people who exemplify what AA is really about, I like to acknowledge that. And I just want to tell you how brilliant I think you are in terms of your approach to the program in general. A humble way. I don't sense any extraordinary ideals, but just following what works.
Well, not least because I've learned that the path to some version of the more I help other people, the better I feel. And it's not about me, I guess, is what we learn in here, isn't it? It's like, let's park that and move on to something more useful and helpful and interesting.
It really is. And I thank you so much for doing the interview today on AA Recovery Interviews, and I do appreciate it.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my friends, that's it for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. I want to thank my guest, Paul B., for sharing his story, and thank you for tuning in. If you've enjoyed the interviews in this podcast series, will you do a little service work by spreading the word about this rich and meaningful listening experience? This show is another helping hand of AA we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. AA Recovery Interviews is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and all other podcast providers. Or visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, where you can listen to every episode of AA Recovery Interviews. And if you want to contact me directly with any comments or suggestions, simply email Howard at aarecoveryinterviews.com. Please also take a minute to leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA, that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.